Established Rich coming right back at you. This situation between Rick Ross and Remy Ma is simple on the surface, but the details make it complicated real fast. Remy's project is what created the problem, but Ross's history is what turned this into a real conversation. Let's start with what actually happened. Remy Ma announced a film through her network called The Biggest Boss, and that title alone was enough to get Ross's attention. But it wasn't just the title. It was the story that really made this thing blow up. The film reportedly follows a police officer who steals a drug dealer's life story and uses it to build his rap career. Now that right there is what triggered everything. Because that storyline hits too close to a real-life narrative. People have been connecting to Rick Ross for years.
I took so many chances just to get here. Music is the only thing that's keeping me from the other side of that fence.
So what, you trying to be a rapper now?
So what I was thinking was, take a little bit of his lifestyle and get a rap game something authentic.
We was booking one-ways, Houston and LAX, no luggage.
We never disclosed that information anywhere. The only way he would have known about that was if he was there.
May you take this time and reflect on the decisions that you make.
I got a little issue. I need you to get this done.
Now, the only thing you gotta do now is work on your rap name. What if we called you C.O. Po-Po?
Rapper thing, I don't know. I think when God was mapping out my life, somebody messed up the cards and they knew it was something with dealing with the people and talking. But it's okay. We're going to get there because I got my own TV show and it's going to be on the Remy Network. Yep. I got my own talk show coming to the Remy Network.
Now, after seeing that, you can understand why this ain't sit right with Ross. This wasn't something subtle. This was something that could make people immediately draw a line back to him. And that's exactly what his legal team said. Rick Ross issued a cease and desist claiming the film used his trade name, his brand, and a version of his life story without his permission. He also said it was confusing fans and damaging his image. Now, from a business standpoint, that's a valid argument. If somebody is using your name or your story in a way that could impact your brand, you gotta step in and shut that down. That's easy to understand. But here's where the story starts getting interesting. Because the moment you say somebody is misusing your story, people are gonna start looking at your story. And that's exactly what happened. Before people even got too deep into the Remy side, they started looking right back at the foundation of who Rick Ross is to the public. And once that happens, you can't control where the conversation goes. Because now people ain't just looking at the film, they looking at the origin of the name.
Well, the fact that he stole my name, not that we had the same name, he actually stole my whole story, my identity, the whole thing. Mm-hmm. You know, he built his career off of my legacy. You know, it's mixed feelings. You know, sometimes when you look at it, you say, oh, wow, somebody named themselves after me. That's flattering. Mm-hmm. You know, that they thought enough about me to say, you know what, I want to be like you. But on the other hand, he didn't have the decency and the respect to come to me and ask me, could he do that? Or compensate me for doing that, you know.
Have you ever spoke to him about this?
Yes, we spoke about it.
What did he say?
When I was in prison, we spoke on the phone. He's supposed to come down to the prison and see me. Mm-hmm. I sent him the visiting form and everything, and he changed his number.
That's it?
You know, I sued him. I sued him, Universal, Warner Brothers, and I think with Sony.
What happened?
I lost the lawsuit.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
They had 15 lawyers.
Oh.
And I had a little small, teeny weeny lawyer, one lawyer. So they just worked him to death, and then the judge eventually gave them the motion that where they won the case. They said I should have filed my lawsuit 5 days before I got out of prison.
Oh, and then you would have had a better chance of winning.
I would have had a chance to win, yeah.
Right.
I could have got it to a jury.
I
knew
see.
if I would have got to a jury trial, I would have won. But in order to get to a jury trial, you have to pass all the litigation, legal, you know, all the little things that you have to go through. So it was statute of limitations is why I lost.
So if you were to bump into Rick Ross, or have you ever bumped into him since that whole situation, or have you just squashed it and let it go? You're I'm done.
Now, after watching it, you see why the irony of this whole thing is so hard to ignore. Because this ain't just a rapper defending his brand. This is a rapper defending a brand that was built on a name that already belonged to somebody else in the public's mind. And that's the part that makes people side-eye this whole situation. You can say legally you got the rights to a trademark or brand, but culturally, people remember how that brand started. They remember the real Freeway Ricky Ross. They remember the conversations about where the image came from. And that's why this story don't feel clean. Because on one hand, you got a man saying somebody else is using his likeness wrong. On the other hand, the culture has been saying for years that his whole persona was built off somebody else's name and history. That's why this story got more layers than a legal letter. Now to make it even more complicated, there's another part of Rick Ross's image that always comes up when people question his history. And that's his correction officer background. Because the image says one thing, but the background told a different story. And that gap is exactly why people keep pushing back when he tries to stand on authenticity.
By the way, too, you worked, I don't know if you want to talk about it all, because
it's too easy.
This is your room.
I can't wait.
So were you a correctional officer at one point?
I was, yeah.
So going all the way back. When was that? How long ago?
Maybe when I was 20.
20 years old.
Yeah.
What kind of people were in there?
You know, I didn't really get to make it to the prison because you got to go through training and all that, and I didn't last long.
Right.
I may have last 4 months.
Right.
Before they said,
yeah,
I was a little tardy.
What made you want to do that?
One of my big homies had just got in trouble, and a lot of things were going on, and he just suggested it.
You fuck with it or no?
No, I didn't. Anything you got to really do, and you fucking running and jogging and all of that shit, man. I missed a few days.
What was your paycheck a week then?
It was horrendous.
How much?
It's like $25K a year, so right?
No, some shit like $500 every 2 weeks.
$500 every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
How long does it take?
They was trying to tell, they wanted me to do right, man. They said they seen greatness in me. Yeah. They wanted me to be great, man.
Now this is important because the public image of Rick Ross was built a certain way, but this information created a gap between image and reality. You can't talk about somebody misusing your story without people bringing up where your story actually starts. And that's what a conflict is. On one side, you got a man legally protecting his brand. On the other side, you have a culture that remembers how that brand was built. And that's the real tension, because this ain't about a movie no more. This is about ownership of an image that's always been questioned. Now, to be clear, Remy Ma's team already started moving different after this. The title got pulled, and they reached out directly to handle the issue. That tells you right there, they didn't want no legal war. But even if the film disappears, the conversation doesn't, because the film was just a trigger. The real issue is the contradiction. How do you claim somebody is using your likeness wrong when your likeness has always been connected to a story that people have been questioning for years? That's the question that don't go away. The law might be on one side, but the culture is looking at the whole picture. And the whole picture ain't clean. It never was. And that's why this story hit the way it did. Not because of Remy Ma alone, but because this situation forced people to look back at Rick Ross and ask the same question they've been asking. What part of his story is really his? And what part of it was built from something else? And that right there is why this story keeps people talking. Because once you pull on that thread, the whole sweater gonna come apart. Now here's where this story stops being about a movie and starts being about a mirror. Because if your brand was built on a name and a narrative that didn't start with you, how do you fully claim ownership over it when somebody else plays with that same idea? That's the part people don't want to say out loud, but everybody is thinking. Because the law and the culture are not the same thing. The law is saying this is his trademark, but the culture is saying we remember what it started. Because hip-hop has always been built on storytelling. But there's a difference between storytelling and identity borrowing. And that line has always been blurry. Rick Ross didn't just create a character. He built the full identity that people believed in. The music, the imagery, the boss talk, the luxury, the street connections, all of that was part of the package. And for years, that package worked. People didn't care where the name came from. People didn't care about the details. As long as the music hit, the image was accepted. But now we in a different time. Now, people care about the details. Now people go back and connect the dots. And that's why this situation feels different. Because this ain't just about what Remy did. This is about what her project reminded people of. It reminded people that this whole thing has always been built on a story of layers. And once those layers get pulled back, you can't change it. Now let's talk about accountability, because this is where the conversation gets real. It's one thing to own a brand. It's another thing to own how that brand was built. And that's where people feel like Rick Ross is losing them. Not because he defended his brand, but because he defended it without addressing the full truth of its foundation. And in hip hop, people respect honesty more than perfection. You can't be one thing in your music and another thing in real life and not expect people to call you out. And that's what this moment represents. This is the culture calling it out, but through that forced conversation. And that's why this hit harder than people expected, because it's not just about him. It's about hip hop as a whole. How many artists built their careers off an image that wasn't fully real? How many people created a version of themselves that was stronger than they actually were? And how many of them would be in the same position if somebody tried to turn their life into a film? Now let's go back to Remy Ma for a second, because even though she was the one who put the project out, she's not the center of this story. And honestly, her response tells you everything you need to know. She pulled the title, she reached out, she didn't turn this into a war. And that lets you know she understood what time it was. She understood that this was bigger than a film. This was about a brand with history attached to it. And when you step into that space, you gotta move careful. But at the same time, the situation exposed something. It exposed that even when you try to protect your image, your past is still part of that image. You can't cut it off, you can't erase it, you can't rewrite it. It's always gonna be there. And that's the lesson in all of this. Be careful what you build your name on, because someday somebody might use the same foundation against you. But hey, that's just my opinion. What's yours? Like, comment, subscribe. Established Rich. I'll be back with another one. Peace.